The year was 1995, and you, my friend, were learning to golf. And we come to this story because it's an important story and one that you shared even in your sermon this week about you learned to golf with your dad. And you learned to golf alongside a man who was a pastor. And this was probably something that he did in his free time. But more importantly, when he had his Mondays off, you guys would get to golf for free. Now, I'm sure free golf was something that captured you. You're like, man, maybe for the rest of my life I get free golf. I should consider pastoral ministry. But I think there's a lot more here, and there's a lot more to be said about the fact that I don't think this happens anymore. From what I've heard from you, I don't think you get free golf for being a pastor.
Sure don't.
So maybe we need to bring free golf back, right? So who knows? Maybe we'll send this podcast to some of our local golf courses.
Make free golf great again.
Oh gosh. But no, that's a real story. That's a real thing. That might surprise some people who are maybe my age, because that was 30 years ago. You were 12 years old, and I'm not even 30, so I wasn't even around for this. Mm-hmm. But the point is, there's an honor, and the position of being a pastor was an esteemed one. That was something that people in the community thanked. And I don't necessarily know if that's true.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I think we want to explore this podcast about really the subject I introduced at the message this last week, and the call to ministry, the call of God on people's life for ministry. We're studying the book of Acts. This is a companion podcast, and essentially Barnabas and Saul were specifically asked to be set aside by the Holy Spirit for a particular ministry assignment, which would be missionaries. They ended up traveling, all over the Roman Empire at peril to their own health, their own safety, their own security, to fulfill this mission, this assignment that God had given them. And God had given everyone the assignment to be missionaries, right? In the sense of everywhere you go, share the good news, right? But he also gives particularly specific assignments to certain people to be leading that, to be the tip of the spear of that, to take on a leadership mantle, an office of authority. And just so everybody knows, the New Testament supports all that. Read through Paul in his epistles. He talks a lot about those who are called to leadership, and that they will give account for how they shepherd and steward those that they're serving and leading. So there is a role and a call that's beyond the general call of make disciples of all nations that every one of us enjoy. There's a specific call. A lot of times we use the term vocational ministry, which just means that what we're doing as our occupational calling is ministry leadership, right? Whether it's local, abroad, in missions, or in our context or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I do think one thing about this podcast I want to start out by saying is there is a general calling that we all have to make disciples and be evangelists, but there's a specific calling of leadership in the church and in the kingdom that I'm referring to here, and God does call people to that. What you're describing by that introductory story is that there was a setting and time, maybe 30 years ago, maybe 30 to 50 years ago, where that career option was more esteemed in the eyes of the general culture. And that's changed. And I just think that's one of many reasons we are seeing some challenge and decline in younger people embracing a call to be a pastor.
I mean, that example, and pardon the cheesy introduction, but that example is a bit like you see the stickers we support our troops.
Yeah.
The military is something that we support.
Yep.
But, we could make these stickers that say we support our pastors. Maybe we should. But
no, we should.
but I've not seen it.
Yeah. No, I think a few things. So I think, this conversation has been happening in my mind and in my circles of relationship for a little bit of time. I sent you in preparation for this podcast, and this is going to be a really specific podcast. We probably won't dive too much into referencing the text, right? We've been in Acts 11 and 12, I think.
Yep.
And just a little bit of 13, and so we've been looking at all sorts of interesting things, and a lot of them are repetitive themes that we've already been discussing on the podcast: suffering, joy, putting to death sin in our lives, and all that's wonderful and great. But this is kind of an introductory subject. And I think one that's morning cough, that's kind of specific to me and to other people like me that are pastors. So one article that I had sent you in preparation for this podcast was, and I mentioned it also in the teaching on Sunday, was by Ryan Berg. Ryan Berg's a great follow on social. He's got a great Substack. But interestingly, Ryan Berg, who's a sociologist, does like super detailed, like dives deep into the religious, political, social landscape of mostly America, or religion in America, but probably, also has broader stuff than that. But he had an article that came out March 13th. So that was 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And he, in it, does a specific expose on the Assemblies of God. So I'm credentialed with the Assemblies of God. We're affiliated with the Northwest Ministry Network of the Assemblies of God. And essentially, the Assemblies of God is the only denomination, according to Ryan Berg, in the country that's not in decline. So the only one that's not in decline. And he talks about a handful of reasons for that. One of which is the Assemblies of God is more diverse, say, than like the Southern Baptist Convention. A lot of the mainline movements have been in decline for some time, and it's like red alert. So like, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, just go down the list. Like they're in significant, kind of precipitous decline. And there's a lot of concern there about what kind of that's going to look like for posterity's sake. Well, the Southern Baptist Convention is the largest denomination. I think they have like 13 million adherents in the United States. And they are also in decline. Like, I can't remember, it's in the article, but like a handful of years ago, maybe a decade ago, they were like 16 million adherents, and now they're down to 13 million adherents. Well, the Assemblies of God has gone up. It was like 2 something million adherents, and it's up to like 3 million adherents. So interesting, he's arguing it's the only movement that's actually growing, and he attributes that to a handful of things. More experiential in its ministry philosophy and approach, which probably fits pretty well with kind of emerging generations' approach to spirituality.
Yep.
I think also ethnically diverse. We are a country that's rapidly transformed and changed in the last 50 years ethnically because of immigration. And so the Assemblies of God and Pentecostalism in general is like thriving in Africa, South America, parts of China, like in basically the third world, or the non-white world, quite frankly. So he thinks part of it is due to that. But whatever the point may be, he's saying the Assemblies of God looks great by so many counts. Let's do a deep dive. So he does a deep dive on this particular movement, our particular movement. And essentially what he discovers is in 1982, the ratio of adherents to clergy was 66-1. So that kind of, surprised him, because I think he feels like, man, like that's decent, but it's gone considerably up from there. So we've had less ministers as the organization, the movement has grown. It was up to 80-1 by 2000. And then it was, I think, 86-1 in 2020. So it continues to go up. So in other words, the movement's growing in people, but the movement's not keeping up in pastoral leadership. And what's interesting about that is then if you look at the particular demographics of that pastoral leadership in the Assemblies of God, here's where it's a little bit more bleak. The modal age, which I learned a new word, the modal age is the age that shows up the most in data. The modal age is 64 years old for a pastor in the AG. The median age in 1982 was 47. So I guess one could argue, like, was the leadership and pastoral pool set up to thrive from 1990 to 2020? And then you've seen some of those results. And if we don't backfill the pipeline, might that be a considerable issue going forward? So in 2023, the median age of a minister in the Assemblies of God is 58. So it went up 11 years. So the median age of a minister, which that's not just pastors, like in the Assemblies of God language, pastors are serving in churches and pastoral functions, but there's many people who are credentialed as ministers, right? So there's some distinction there across the landscape. But his argument is, he says right here in bold, to me, this should be a real area of concern for the AG. And so I was familiar with this. I'm also familiar anecdotally just with conversations in our network associated to like our university that's over in Kirkland, and just like enrollment and the need for future pastors, pastor peers of mine that are kind of like frustrated, like trying to hire a kids pastor or a worship pastor, and they're like they don't know where to go. And a lot of the shift, I think, has moved to, if you don't raise them up yourself, if you don't know how to find them and hire them within your own church context, you're probably not going to find them. So I do think there's some cause for concern here. Yeah. So that backdrop, I think, is important to communicate as the context for why this particular sermon, selecting those 5 verses in that place, Acts 12:25 through 13, verse 5, was captivating to me. Because it's an example of something that happened in the life of the early church. Namely, the Holy Spirit speaks to set apart Barnabas and Saul to the work of ministry from a specific ministry assignment he had for them. And so do we still have room for that in our not so much in our theology? I think a lot of people probably do have room for it in their theology, but it's almost like functional cessationism. It's like, yeah, but like no one's interested, thinking about it, talking about it, hoping their kids say yes to it, raise their hand. What an honor it would be if my kid came, back to me from a camp, or came back to me from a youth night, or from a Sunday morning service like this last Sunday, and said, "Hey mom, hey dad, I feel called to be a pastor." And they're like, "Huh?" And let's just dive into it. Like you alluded to it, like what's going on there. And I alluded to it in my sermon. That's why I want to spend this special episode to kind of talk about it. What has happened in the last 50 years in particular, but I think it's probably 50 to 75 years. And this would track nicely with a book. We did a book study on A Life in the Negative World by Aaron Wrenn. Mm-hmm. And we did it alongside kind of another view on that similar subject, which was N.T. Wright and Chris Bird's book, The Powers.
The Powers, yes.
The Powers. Yeah, we did that before the election this last fall. So here's what I would suggest. Cultural respect for the pastorate is low. You alluded to it. No one's giving you free golf on Mondays. But in times past, like in the middle of the 20th century and the late 20th century, pastors were often the more educated, more articulate leaders in a given community. That was a thing. And in smaller towns, there may even have been a sense where the pastor was just as important as the mayor or a doctor.
Right.
That career choice and path was seen on a similar level. Mm-hmm. And so generally speaking, cultural respect and esteem for the pastorate is low. Why might that be? Well, I do think the secularization of a culture plays into it. When you have people who don't go to church, and that number is like, for example, in the state of Washington, I just saw a recent, this is also, I think, from Ryan Berg, 18% of people in the state of Washington go to church 12 times a year or more.
Wow.
In the state of Washington, 18% of people go to church 12 times a year or more. So think about that. That's going to have an influence. Remember, we did a book study also a year ago on the Great De-Churching. Mm-hmm. If people are less and less engaged and participating in the local church, it would make sense that their kids aren't ever thinking that's a career option. Right?
Right.
So the de-churching of America is the de-pastoring of America. Mm-hmm. Those are linked.
Yeah.
And I guess if you're a Christian and you care about this, you should ask yourself if you think that's going in a good direction. Mm. Another factor, I think, is just generally spiritual prestige. So I think like in a family that's deeply religious, oftentimes seeing a child, a grandchild, embrace a call to be a pastor or a missionary was like a spiritual badge of honor. It was like, what an honor that God would select my child or my grandchild for this. We raised them to know and serve and love God, and that they would be qualified. Because let's just also kind of like pull the curtains back for a second.
Yeah.
Just because we have a need and just because people maybe go, I want to be a pastor, doesn't mean they're qualified to be one. There are requirements morally, ethically, doctrinally that are significant to be eligible to give your life to this. So I think in a time past, in a more deeply religious and fervent family, it was a sign of prestige. Like, what an honor. And that's where sometimes you get I'm the grandson of a great granddaddy, he was a pastor and his son was a pastor. And then what you have is the intermingling of that with people's bad taste of nepotism and like unfair biasy and all these sorts of things. And so you could look at that from two sides of a coin, but you could also look at it from like Jesus did what his dad did, his stepdad.
Right.
Like there's also a trade component of like developing them. And so I think that's a factor that's changed. We're in a time where if parents and grandparents were honest, the secularization of America and the economic shifting in our country of rapid and significant prosperity, it's actually pretty significant, causes a lot of people to hem and haw about the idea of their kid taking on ministry as their vocation when they'd probably rather have them be more successful, quote unquote. So a certain level of comfort, control, and materialism in parents and grandparents dissuades their children from pursuing that kind of a calling because it might not pay as well. And it might not certainly start out as easy, and it's going to have different challenges. And so it's like, why have a harder life than you have to? Have an easier life. So if the families who are Christians, their imagination is shaped by Babylon, I'm using that as a spiritual term.
Right.
The spirit of mammon, the spirit of wealth, success, ease, comfort, then it doesn't really jive. Like when I became a pastor, my salary was $24,000 a year. And that was actually a pretty decent starting wage at that time.
And how old were you?
I was 19. I was young.
Oh.
Yeah. But like I didn't make more than $45,000 a year. I planted True Up Church and was making $45,000 a year. So that was 13 years ago. So just give people some context. Like I made $45,000 a year 13 years ago. So yeah, there is an element. And I think that pastoral and church staff wages are getting better and more competitive. And I think that there's a lot of health that's been gained in some of those areas. I think there's been some faulty theology, like keep pastors poor, keep them humble. And I also think there's a reaction to the error of the prosperity gospel and the celebrity pastor culture, which is like we got these millionaire pastors rolling around in jets, just souring the taste for all of reality, which is like, no, that's actually not how 99% of pastors live in any way, shape, or form.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that gives people skepticism, which just continues to build disdain. Then add on top of this, so not only cultural respect waning, spiritual prestige in families waning for this kind of calling and vocation, the rise of secularity, the shifting of economic pressure and reality and opportunity in our country, then add on top of that reduction in institutional trust. That people today are more wary than ever of politicians, celebrities, people that have platforms. It's like the Catholic Church, the priest abuse crisis, the evangelical church celebrity pastor moral failure crisis. You've got all this stacking up. So it's like, man, I mean, I'll be really candid, okay? That's what this podcast is for.
Bring it.
I've had to wrestle with this. Every time in the news or in the media, another pastor does something stupid, I half want to quit. Seriously. I have, like, okay, I told my wife, middle of COVID, this is for separate reasons, but middle of COVID, during all that painful season, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't handle one more email telling me I'm in league with the devil and one more person saying they've left our church over some stupid reason. Like, the amount of abandonment trauma that a lot of pastors face silently, of just people leaving your church, ghosting you, just like, you're like, I don't know. They're here, they're gone, it's over. They're at the church down the street. Like, so there's an ecclesiastical crisis that's a big fancy word for church. There's a church structure, leadership, health crisis that's fueling, even amongst pastors, a level of burnout and disdain. That's what Ryan Burke's written a lot about this. He was himself a pastor. He is no longer. that like the amount of pastors who are ready, the amount of pastors who are ready to like turn in the pink slip. This was especially true right after COVID. That's understandable. Lots of people felt that way in their vocations and, medical and all sorts of fields. But like the amount of pastors who are like, I'll do something else. So that's real. So I'm kind of spinning a web here. So just try to follow. It's going to be a little bit messy.
Yeah.
But you've got like layers of factors. We've got a loss of cultural respect, a loss of religious fervor and prestige inside the church communities and families in particular. We've got the rise of secularity in our culture, and the great de-churching is the great de-pastoring. We've got economic shifts where it's like, I have an opportunity, a lot of people have opportunity to make way more money than you would as a pastor. I don't know how to say this in a like, could I be more financially successful in a different career? I think the answer to that question is yes. But I don't want to entertain that thought, because it's like, I'm trying to be obedient to a calling. But like, that's a challenge. That's a challenge for a lot of people. It's like, well, man, I could make a lot more money doing something else. And that's not wrong. It's not wrong. Like, I thank God for people who are very successful in business, in the marketplace. Like, we need all sorts of people at the table of God's kingdom to move it forward. But here's what we don't need. We don't need everyone trying to be the successful marketplace billionaire with no pastors. That'll be a guaranteed recipe for failure. So it's like, what happens is it ebbs and flows. Like we might have been in a season in the 50s where it was like, everyone wants to be a pastor. Nobody wants to realize they could be an entrepreneur for the kingdom. And I feel like it's definitely swung the other way. Everyone's like, oh, I'll be an entrepreneur for the kingdom. Yeah, and it's also nice to make $500,000 a year. So I just think what we have now is another layer of economic pressure, complexity, and change. And then we've got all this institutional breakdown. We've got the Catholic Church making the news. We got the next celebrity pastor making the news. We got a few influencers who aren't even pastors, quite frankly, who are peeing in the Cheerios of every pastor that's just faithfully loving God and preaching in their pulpit and leading a flock of people in their city for the glory of Jesus, fighting off the devil. And I think that's some of the soup that's created challenge here. I think that also technology has changed this massively.
Yeah.
Massively. So like one of the things that's happening on a bigger scale is the middle-sized church is being cannibalized. I don't know if you've heard about this. Yeah. This is a sociological factor. There. Meaning like there's fewer churches between 1 and 300 people than ever before. There's still churches that are smaller, like 120 and down. But there's more like medium, large-sized churches. The small church is the small, medium-sized church is kind of evaporating. I think some of it is because it's just kind of like something you see in just culture in general. Technology has enabled those who are successful, effective, skilled to kind of like operate in a more efficient and effective manner. So there's just like some economies of scale factor that have been enabled by technology that's also changing the landscape. So I think there are also pastors who are weary and tired and feel like, I don't want to do this. I'm not as good at this as so-and-so. So I think that's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, bro, this thing is it's a major kaleidoscope. And also with technology, it's also, be fair, like I'm looking at my kids, right? Like my oldest son's going to Whitworth University this next year and going to run track there. And he's trying to figure out what he wants to do in life. And he's currently curious about physical therapy or what's that called? Sports medicine.
Yeah.
And, I think that now kids that are going through high school, college career classes are like a thing. There's like, get ready. You have a million options at your disposal. And because of technology, there's a proliferation of variety where I think in years past, it was kind of like, well, maybe you grew up in a small town. It's like, go work for the mill, go work for the general store.
Yeah.
Maybe if you were big, real smart, you could go off to a big school and go be a doctor or a lawyer. But like the reality is, so in that context, being a pastor in a culture that revered and esteemed the office and gave a sense of significance, and parents and grandparents who were so proud of you if you did, and a financial system and situation where you didn't feel like you were giving up so much, you weren't quite as broke to do it, made more sense and more people did it. So I think that's a part of it. So you just have like massive change that we've been living through in the last, I think, 50 years, if I could sum it up, most people, I think from the outside looking in, think a few things. I could never do that. I'm not moral or worthy enough to do it. I think people think that's too financially unstable or diminished. That's too emotionally taxing. Like, I just don't want to deal with all that drama and stress of relationship and leadership. And it's not very impressive in my eyes or the world's eyes. And I think what we have to do with those factors is we need to do some counter catechesis, which is really big theological words for saying, this is the message the world is sending you and telling you this is the beautiful and true way. And you need to ask yourself if the Bible agrees. Does the scripture agree that it is worth it, if God is calling you, to give him your yes, even if the financial future is uncertain, even if it is emotionally taxing, even if it is unimpressive in the eyes of the world? Does God already have our yes? And I think that's the thing I would say to everyone in our church and listening. Not everyone is called to be a pastor. Not everyone's called to be a missionary. Not everyone's called to be an elder on a church board. Not everyone's called to lead in different ways. We're all called to serve and participate, but we all have different callings. I get that. But we will not be in a healthy place if we don't replenish genuinely called and qualified leadership. And the ethos of the church should be all 2,000 people that come to True Up Church, they should all say, God already has my yes. If he called me, I would do it. He might not call me, but if he did, I would do it. We should have that about everything. If God called me to adopt, I would do it. If God called me to go on that missions trip, I would do it. If God called me to write a $25,000 check to this ministry or the church, I would do it. That's the question. That's the question. I just think for me in my journey, that's been significant. And I think that that's laid the groundwork for so many other healthy parts of my life and my walk with God. Is like, God, you have my yes. If you're in it, I want it. If you're not in it, I don't want it.
Yeah.
And so to me, this isn't even about leadership tactics. This is about discipleship.
Yeah.
At a fundamental level. The goal should not be, does everybody become a pastor? No, they won't, and they shouldn't. We shouldn't. That's not what we want. Like on Sunday, I had 60 people come up to me. That's awesome.
That is cool.
60 people in a church of our size. That's great. And here's what I would say. Not every one of those 60 are called. Some think they are, but they're working it out. There are another 60 people that didn't come up to me, that a handful of them really are, but they don't have the courage yet. There are people in that group who aren't qualified yet. There are people in that group who will become qualified. There are people, there's all sorts of things to figure out.
Yeah.
But the invitation, the teaching, the communication, the clarity of need, I think is essential. And I think identifying some of the hurdles that are in the way are important. And I've had to live through some of those. You mentioned, to kick it off, to kind of bring full circle. I'll volley the ball back to you because it's been a long monologue. But being a pastor, here's what Justin and I talk about a lot, because we've been doing this together for a long time. Being a pastor has some things that are really brutal, but it's also got a lot of things that are really beautiful. And I imagine everyone's vocation is probably like that.
Yeah.
But I think I can speak to some of what those are if you want, but I think that's a unique element of pastoral ministry. It's just like my dad called it this. He always joked about writing a book about it. The glory and the grief.
Yeah.
The glory and the grief of pastoral ministry, because it's both. In that sense, it's a lot like Jesse's sermon 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Holding in tension joy and grief at the same time.
Yeah. I want to come back. We're going to come back to some of the beautiful things that I think only pastors get eyes in a front row seat to see. But I actually want to take the direction of discipleship. And I want to go a little deeper. And I want to tell a story that you and I have in common. So, yesterday you said calling is listening and obeying God's voice, not the curation of your own ambition. You and I were on a bike ride. You laugh because you know exactly what I'm going to say. We were on a bike ride in, I want to say 2020, 2021.
It was 2021 or 22.
Okay.
Yeah, it was later.
I was trying to distance the conversation.
I'm not that guy.
Years ago. No, but I think it's important because this is going to be an example of why this is a discipleship conversation. We're on a bike ride, and I think you just asked me, like, you were just genuinely curious, like, so, like, would you ever consider being a pastor? I was like, no, not really. And you're like, what's your best reason? What's your best reason for not? And I remember what I said stopped you. You were in front of me, and you just put on your brakes. I think what I said to you, and I give you full permission to regurgitate it as honest as I actually said it, but it was something to the effect of, I just don't think being a pastor is very impressive. And I feel bad saying that now because I get choked up thinking about it because I realize how immature that was.
Yeah, I think to peel back the scab here, I think you said it's not significant enough and it doesn't pay enough.
Yeah, I did say that.
It doesn't provide enough prestige and it doesn't provide me enough economic opportunity. Those were the particular things. It was about glory and success. Wasn't glorious enough and wouldn't make you successful enough. And to your credit, like, you know, we're in a formal, informal mentorship relationship. And I think you've come a long way in lots of different areas. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's good. And I don't think that the admission of that automatically means you're running from the call to pastoral ministry. But I do think your point, probably where you're headed, is that's an ugly thing to say, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and thanks for being transparent. I wasn't going to go here. Really, you're being vulnerable. I wasn't going to go there, but you did it. So I feel like I can follow it up. I just think, to me, I would say, I hope that no one finds that acceptable as a posture of their heart and calls themselves a Christ follower.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like, I don't know. I just go, wait, like, does that fit with Jesus? Like, no. Does that fit with any of the apostles? No. Does that even fit, I think, with people in the early church? No. I don't think it fits with Phoebe. I don't think it fits with Apollos. I don't think it fits with the early church fathers. I don't think it fits with even the most successful business leaders of the early. I don't think it fits.
Yeah.
I think they would say, we live for the prestige of Jesus, and we live for the fame of his name. We're not living for our own fame and prestige. So whatever, like the Apostle Paul says, whatever I count as gain, it's actually loss. It's rubbish. And that's not me advocating for a poverty mentality. That's saying, to whatever degree someone finds themselves wildly successful by the world's standards, man, you better check yourself, right? Like, you better be humble and self-reflective and introspective and active against the monster of greed and materialism and pride, right? Like, and that's just as much true for a pastor as it is for a parishioner. So I think the other thing that's interesting, and I know this is filleting your comment a little bit, but like, how do you think that holds up at the judgment seat of Christ? If you retained that attitude, and I don't think you have, if you never repented of that attitude and it was like, yeah, Lord, I would never accept or ever dream to want a vocation that would put on forward investment all of my greatest rewards. Like, nope, I want them all now. I mean, at some level, I know it's pushing the analogy, but it's rather lost son-ish. It's like telling the father, I wish you were dead, give me my inheritance now.
Right.
Instead of the discipline of like, you are a great father, this is a great house, I will inherit much, I can be patient, and you will take care of me, right? Now, are there traces of dysfunction in evangelical theology and the way the church in America has expressed herself that need to be rectified here? I think probably so. Because I think there is a little bit of a feeling of like, if you're a pastor and like church people are like, yeah, keep them poor, keep them broke, no amount of pay for their retirement. Like I think there's some things we're trying to, at least I feel like in my generation, we're trying to rectify it. And I think what happens is if the prevailing sentiment in the parishioner pool and the church board pool is keep ministry a poor, undistinguished, insignificant, rub your face in the dirt occupation, you'll continue to get demotivated, disgruntled pastors, and you'll get the 5% flare-ups of people who overreact and go mega celebrity millionaire. Yeah. Does that make sense? Whereas if we brought it more to the mean and the median, and it was like, hey, being a pastor could be a respected, honored occupational option in an array, a spectrum that reflects the people of your church. So if like the median income and occupational range of your church is XYZ, like a pastor should be in that gamut. Like it should reflect the education, the leadership, the training, the skill set that it would be appropriate to do in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. I think if we could get there, we would eliminate a barrier. So I'm not whitewashing your heart. I think that was a really vulnerable and ugly moment, but I do think there are reasons for it that are unnecessary and self-inflicted. That the church needs to change, which is like, no, don't make it so like that it means to be a pastor. You just cannot make it. Your kids could never go to college. You could never go on a vacation. You'd never be able to save for retirement. You're just going to be poor, rubbing nickels together, having holes in your pants. Like, no, that's a miss. So I think what we're dealing with again is we have the negative consequence of extremes, poverty theology and prosperity theology, and they've harmed us in both directions. Mm-hmm. And one of the fallouts from that's not just been distortions of gospel theology. It's been a choking of the pipeline of future potential pastors. So, I mean, there's a practical consequence to that.
Yeah. So you kind of already hinted at it, but what are bad reasons to get into ministry? I mean, you talked about fame, you talked about influence. Like, well, I know we're talking about a minority of people right now who are being called. Yep. I do think there are those who have been quote called, and maybe there's actually immaturity there.
Yeah, totally. Good point. Immaturity is not a disqualifier for call.
Right. There you go.
It's a process. Yeah. I would say bad reasons to want to be in ministry. Fame. Codependent need meeting, though a lot of pastors do that. In other words, they find themselves drawn to meet the needs of others because it's how they meet the needs of themselves. Mm-hmm. That's not a great reason. Mm-hmm. Profit would be, I mean, you just look through scripture. It's like the lie of money and magic. There's a great rebuke, bad reasons to get rich, because the Bible absolutely warns that it is a qualification to be an elder, that you are not greedy, that you're not seeking monetary gain. So that's true. Or as Paul also says, the love of money is the root of all evil. Mm-hmm. The love of money. So I think getting rich, I think getting famous, I think trying to meet deep needs in yourself, bad reasons to get into ministry because someone told you to. I think you need the Lord to tell you to. I think you need the Holy Spirit. I think that's the constraining voice. And if that happens, you can ignore every man, ignore the Holy Spirit at your peril.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus, I won't go on the tangent there. So other bad reasons to get into ministry. Pride and ego. You think you can fix it all?
Oh, man.
You know, Ryan and Justin and the board and the staff at Trope Church, they're stupid. I know how to do it better. A lot of church planters struggle with this. This is a church planter issue. I try to help church planters all the time. If I can coach them, help them. Do not say to people, and I'm not sure everyone, when I planted a church, I was actually, I think, maybe perceived and maybe even did some things that made people think I kind of had that attitude. In fact, remind me to tell a story about this, because I had a letter sent to me in the last year about it. But yeah, I think sometimes what I would say is important when people are planting churches, starting churches, doing new things. Hey, we're coming to add reinforcements to this community. We're not the church Spokane finally needs. We are coming to the front lines of an existing troop set of soldiers, and we're adding reinforcements. That's the attitude. I like to say it this way in church planter coaching. I would say to church planters, do not lead with consumer marketing differentiation. Lead your church with theological vision. So here's consumer marketing differentiation. We're not your grandpa's church. We're the church for everyone else. We're the church for the true believers, and even true hope, I guess you could argue. Does that indicate that? I don't think it does. I'm pointing to theological vision. I'm not pointing to our methodology.
Right.
But what a lot of churches do is they go, we're contemporary, we do cool stuff, we point to our methods.
Yeah.
And then we basically create a target market and we try to do consumer marketing tactics. I just don't think that's very helpful. Lead with theological vision. Why are we planting a church? Because 18% of people in the state of Washington go to church once a month. That's why. Why are we planting a church? Because there's tons of lost people and the fields are white and ripe to harvest, Jesus said. Send laborers into the field. Pray the Lord of the harvest would send laborers. That's why. Why are we doing it? Because we want to join in the tapestry of pastors and mission-minded people in Spokane and bring reinforcements to the battle. That is certainly the most important thing we could do. That's why.
Yeah.
So lead with theological vision. Lead with gospel. Lead with kingdom. Lead with disciple making as the shared cooperative initiative of the church in a city.
Yeah.
Don't lead with finally, because that's the thing. And church planting, which I love, is vogue in an entrepreneurial society. Because people are in love with new.
Right.
And God can use that tactic and that tool. And there's a lot of data to back that up, that church plants are very successful and effective in reaching lost people and opening doorways of conversation that get more salvations, baptisms than typically traditional and longstanding churches. So I get that. Like Tim Keller's done he's passed away, but like so much of his work was on that thesis.
Yeah.
And he did a lot of work on that with Redeemer City, is it City to City or Redeemer City Network or whatever it was in Manhattan? Yeah. So my point is, those are some bad reasons, like 5 of them. Think you can fix it all for just ego and pride and platform, profit, codependent need meeting, because someone else told you to and it wasn't God.
Yeah.
That's just like, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I do think it's an arduous calling. Paul Tripp has a book called Dangerous Calling, written to pastors. And he just basically goes, hey, this is a dangerous calling. Like you can shipwreck your own faith, you can shipwreck your own soul, you can harm a lot of people. This is a dangerous calling.
Yeah.
Enter it with a very sober set of reflections. You crossing a threshold here.
Yeah.
I think that's needed and important. But we can't we can't like just scare everybody and be like, oh yeah, it's horrible, it's hell. Nobody wants to do it. It's for the Marines only. I mean, there's some truth to some of those things. Like if that scares out the flesh in you, good. But what it should do is refine and steel up like a backbone, the word that God put in someone that he's called them. And if he calls them, he will equip them and he'll make them qualified. And it might take time, but he will ready them for that which he's assigned them. Like that's really important.
Yeah.
So
I know this isn't fully fleshed out, but I'm going to ask anyways. We had 60 people come up after church, and not entirely sure what all of those people raised their hands for, but the general sense is, hey, like maybe God's tugging my heart in one way or another. We have a college and young adults ministry that seems like it's just growing gangbusters. Attendance is up. Like the overall sentiment right now, if you're just sitting back, it's like, man, things seem good, right? Like it seems like at True Hope, there's a lot of young people who are interested in leading. Like, so if that's the case, as the leader of True Hope Church, is there something that your heart feels tugged towards, or something that you're envisioning as far as developing leaders? And I mean, kind of answering the call to what we started with Ryan Berg. Like he's like, hey, we need more people.
Yeah.
So like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I have like embryonic thoughts.
Okay.
But it's been something we've chewed on, thought about, wondered about for some time. But like, there's a couple ways you can do this. When these people come forward, I think it's like, hey, what next steps do you need to take? Well, some of them just need to get a sense of refinement and discernment about what they're sensing. Others have a sense of clarity and discernment that they feel called to ministry in some form. And then they need next steps for training and confirmation.
Yeah.
And so training and confirmation is really the question that I think you're alluding to. And so, yeah, we've talked about potentially starting a school of ministry, whether we do that locally, an internship, whether we partner with other universities, organizations, or whatever. We've also got some great universities local that a lot of these students are already in. So they are getting some, like Whitworth is one of them.
Right.
There's Eastern, there's Campus Crusade crew at Eastern, there's Chi Alpha, there's like all these, there are components that are there. But yeah, I think we're still trying to discern it, but I definitely think it's on my mind.
Yeah.
It's on my mind. I don't really have like a cute little, like quick, tidy answer.
It's fine.
I think I have a burden. I think I have an opportunity. I think I have something like I am thinking a lot about like what is the leadership pipeline, the developmental training pipeline, and also technologies, again, disrupting this entire industry and this entire segment of our culture, even in Christian subculture. How do people get trained? Like, do they have to go off to some school somewhere? Can they do it, online? Can they do it distance? Should it be embedded in the local church? Because one of the things that happens at a university setting is sometimes university students have a hard time attaching to a local church because they go to chapel and they have other classes, and it just kind of feels like life with God and with community is all contained on campus.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I have some opinions about that. I think that there's some good there, but I think there's a lot of negative there.
Yeah.
Because I think to detach the people you're hoping are going to lead your future from your present is a stupid idea. Like, they need to be attached to the local church. Because that's if we're going to have pastors in the local church deployed, they need to get on the ground training, development, engagement.
Yeah.
Because some of what's happened with higher education and academia, that's where like there's been these negative words like you're going to seminary or cemetery. like
Never heard
you
that
heard
one.
that?
No.
Oh, yeah. That comes from a little bit more of an anti-intellectual, anti-education slice of evangelicalism. That kind of is like, okay, go get all the Holy Spirit trained out of you,
Right.
and you'll just like worship your mind.
Oh yeah.
And then we've got a lot of progressive, liberal, woke slide in a lot of our universities and institutions. So we've got that going on. So we've got a detachment from the local church. We've got a training system that at times leads students to conclusions theologically that are far afield of where the church is actually gaining ground practically in the local church. Meanwhile, a lot of those students, to compound the financial issue, because the cost of higher education, are going into epic amounts of debt. And so they come out of university cloistered in a chapel community to the campus ministry environment that's not replicable or mapped onto the local church environment. And they come out with $50, $60, $80, $100, $150,000 of debt, and with more of a liberal, progressive theological bent. Meanwhile, all the progressive liberal churches are dying in our country. You feel me? They have never had their feet on the ground in the local church. And they're saddled with so much significant debt. When they're offered a $50,000 salary at their local church, they're like, I ain't taking that.
Right.
And it's at that point, not because they're trying to worship success, it's because they've been laden by counter success, which is debt.
Yeah.
This thing's layers deep, bro. Honestly, like, I'm not going to solve it in a podcast, but I do think raising awareness and having the conversation is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Because the reason why is people smarter than me with way more vested interest in education and development of future leaders, mostly denominational leaders, because that's a huge part of their thing, is to solve this. And it's proven hard to solve.
Yeah.
You're coming up against multiple factors. Institutional trust decline, rise of secularity, cultural respect loss, spiritual prestige loss in the church, fewer career options in the past, now the multiplicity of options, an economic shift, a challenge of getting trained, training being detached from where your ministry will be, and a progressive slide of higher education.
Yeah.
That is massive. And before I forget it, I want to tell the story about the guy who sent me a letter.
Go for it.
And then I'm going to move into identity formation because I think that's key.
Man, I got one last thing too.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, I just think that one thing to just like encourage young people with, you don't always know the impressions you leave. Trust God, stay humble, stay vulnerable, continue to repent, be sanctified. And I think in the end, if you keep loving Jesus and getting close to Jesus, things will be okay. We planted Maranatha Church in Meade. And there was a pastor there who'd served faithfully. And the church was struggling. And so he was ready to retire. And in his retiring, his church essentially was given a true hope. We bought it. Actually. The building, yep. But like, we sent Brennan and Kelly to plant a church there. And it's been beautiful to see that pastor and his wife connect with that team. And they're just so blessed because they're seeing their dreams fulfilled through a younger generation. And to have he and his wife come to True Up Church for a season, they were sat under my teaching and were participating in the church for 6 months. The last part of Brennan's, training and apprenticing as a church planting resident. And he wrote me a letter, just kind of saying like, I deeply appreciate you. I recognize God's call on you. I kind of had a different vibe of you when you first came here to plant, kind of that you were Mr.
We're going to fix it.
Yep. Yep. Whether I did that and maybe I did or I didn't, or just, it's whatever.
Yeah.
But it was just so beautiful. It was like, man, a cool, awesome moment of just like, yeah, like none of us are perfect. So even like when you were being vulnerable, like, man, I've said things, done things that we're not becoming. They were not who I want to be, who I want to stay. And we're all on a journey of redemption and sanctification. And so I just think that's a beautiful thing. So I want to make sure I tied that loop on that story.
Yeah, that's good.
So I don't want people to hear this podcast and think, well, gosh, the only people qualified to be pastors are like the top, 10th of 1%. Like,
yeah.
No, I think there's lots of growth for everybody, but it is a commitment to growth.
Right. I think the importance of that story too, it illustrates the example that like God's going to use you, right? Like whether that was your immaturity or it wasn't.
Yes.
Like you didn't need to wait until a certain point. God used you.
So good. Yeah. I'll give another example. Dr. Jerry Sitzer, who's a friend and mentor. I meet with him semi-regularly. I was confiding with him recently and I said, Jerry, I don't know about this and I don't know about this step or this option. And I just don't want this to be about me. I don't want pride and ego. And he looked at me and he said, Ryan, stop. That's not you. And even if it's 10% you, get over it. We're all in process. And I was like, oh, like it was speaking of that. It was kind of like, yeah, if you're like a crazy narcissistic megalomaniac, yeah, you're not qualified for ministry. But like the idea that you are shed 100% of any level of vanity or ego, or in fact, the people who think they're 100% shed of their ego are some of the most dangerous people.
Right.
It's the people who keep their shadow close to their memory, who tend to not imbibe it so much.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think your quote, I think you said this when we were going through Genesis, is you either have an affinity or you trust leaders who walk with a limp.
100%. 100%. Yeah, exactly. So the two scariest leaders are the leader that are flat out unabashed, abusive, toxic narcissist, and the leader who thinks they could never be that.
Right.
Those are, no. You need to walk with a little more of a limp and recognize that there is fallen flesh hanging on you, and you need to keep short accounts and close to God. You are dependent on being close to Christ to be an effective minister for Christ.
Yeah.
So I think I want to talk about this last feature, another feature that you mentioned it a little bit earlier on, and I mentioned it in my sermon, identity formation. So I think that in times past, or maybe just in times of more spiritual fervor in the church, the question we would ask and we would prize and we would cherish is, what is God calling me to? And I think the question asked now, more so, amongst ourselves and in our education systems and in our public school systems for sure, is what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? In other words, the same meta narrative, the same meta theology, the same meta philosophy that says, I will construct my identity, which leads an anatomical man to say, I'm actually a woman, or it leads to some other self-expressive, self-constructed identity approach. It's also latent in plenty of other areas. What do I want to do? What do I want to be? Even as parents, I find myself guilty of it. It's like, hey, Liam, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be? How many times have I flipped the question, hey, how much clarity have you got yet on what God's calling you to become? Feel that difference? But like baked into our cultural moment is self-autonomy. And it's self-directed self-expression. And this is the age of the self-expressive man, humanity. And so I think we might need to revisit our language and conversations with each other and have more, I've tried to do this in the last handful of years with True Up Church because quite frankly, the structure and scope of this church community and family is beyond what I envisioned it would become. And so I found myself, and I think people at our church can attest to this, over and over just saying, God's writing this story. Like my favorite song we sing at True Up Church right now is that song where it's like, you write my story, you hold it all together, God of my present, God of my future, you write my story, you hold it all together. I love that song. Why? Because it's like, that's like the refrain of my soul. Probably for a couple of years.
Yeah.
You are the God of my present, you're the God of my future. You write my story. You hold it all together. It has helped me do two things. It has helped me keep anxiety at bay in my life.
Yeah.
Because here's what I have found. When I swallow without critique the false narrative, the false gospel from our culture that says, Ryan, carve your own path, make your own destiny, become a person of significance, I tend to buckle under the pressure of those anxious thoughts. But when I anchor my heart in God owns my story, God writes my future, God is the source of strength in my present, He holds it all together.
Yeah.
I don't have to perform. I don't have to become something that someone else says is great. Like my life is already everything I need it to be because of Jesus. Everything forward is just a response of obedience, of delighted, joyful obedience, even if it means grief, to the calling of God, to the voice of God. That's it. That's it. So, Lord, do you want us to expand our facility? I think you do. We'll follow you. Lord, do you want us to go purchase that property? Do you want us to send that church planner? Do you want us to start that ministry? Do you want my kid to do that? I'm just releasing. So, think about it. I think the spiritually mature discipleship framework is surrender, release, obey. I surrender. I let go of all the things I've been holding, prestige. That doesn't make me enough money. That doesn't make me important enough. I have needs in me that need me. I'm going to surrender to the Lord. I'm going to release. I'm going to release myself, my story, my control, my anger, my bitterness. I'm just going to release, and then I'm free to obey. Just obey.
Yeah.
And I just think one of the struggles I had in embracing my call to ministry was different than yours. It wasn't, that's not good enough for me. It was a little bit of a flip, and it's just as insidious. It's sinful. It was, people will not think I'm legitimate. It's like a kid who just inherits their father's wealth.
Yeah.
It's like I will be, so I guess it is similar to what the significance part. It is. It was like, I won't be significant.
Yeah.
But mostly in it for me was the fear of criticism, that I'll be critiqued.
Yeah.
And I can say for my pastoral journey now, which is how 23 years. That has been one of the largest battles of my ministry and leadership life. Is fear.
Yeah.
Fear of men. Fear of what they think, fear of what they'll say. And one of the ways I tend to guard against that is the acquisition of knowledge so that I can assure myself that I'll have something to say to the person who critiques.
Yeah. Where I want to end this thing, and I'm thinking, 20 some years ago, we were introduced to a line of products that all started with iPhone, iPod, iMac, and you've grown up in that era of the I. But the other thing I've also heard you say, and I'm excited that we get to honor him on this podcast, is you also are standing on the shoulders of John Aletsky. And leaders and fathers play a massive role in what is to come in the next generation. And praise God that he's doing better and that his surgery went well and that he gets to have more days with his family. But I'm thinking, I think something that I've gotten from you regarding your dad is always this invitation to dream bigger. Think like recently you've been talking about, I want this church at off of North Lincoln Street. I want this place to be here in 100 years. That's dreaming big. That's bigger than the next 5 years, 7 years. So what is it, if you could try to put your finger on it? Think about your growing up experience. Yeah, you're a PK, but we use that word PK like almost negatively sometimes. Oh, he's a PK. Pastor's kid for who didn't understand that. What's an attribute about your growing up experience that you think your father imparted on you that actually put warmth in your heart towards the call of ministry?
I think my dad did ask those questions, kind of like, hey, what is God calling you to? Like, I think he did more than just what do you want to do. I think there was a God-oriented component to the conversation. I think one of the things my dad did super well is he brought me along. I think he just exposed me to his call. I think the thing that my parents did well is I think that they helped me see how a normal, content life could be lived while being a pastor. I saw the pain, and it did influence me. One of the reasons I was always attracted to planting a church was I didn't want to take over an existing church because I watched my dad do it. And the systems and structures of power and bureaucracy that are in place are so challenging to deal with, and they oftentimes run pastors ragged. And so I thought I'd rather opt for the harder option in some ways at the start, which is church planting. And then, again, I was scared to ever do that until God really called me and it was clear. But I think my dad just brought me along. I think he brought me in. My parents did a good job of exposing us to the world of adults. They brought us up. Yeah. And I think they were real. Yeah. Like, I don't think I didn't struggle with the dad I saw on the platform, the dad I saw at the dinner table. Both were imperfect. See, I think sometimes people think, well, yeah, he must have been so stellar. I'm not trying to take any sheen off of my parents' righteousness or example. I actually don't think it's about righteousness. I think it's about humility. Yeah. Here's a better word. It's about integrity. Yeah. Which integrity is actually just being whole. It's not being perfect. It's being whole. Yeah. It's being unified, right? Holistically unified. So it's like I bring my vulnerabilities to the pulpit because my vulnerabilities are in at the dinner table. Yeah. So I'm not trying to put on. I'm not trying to perform. I'm trying to serve both arenas. So like one of my prayers for my kids is they go, man, like my dad tried to serve us in the home and he also served the church, and he did it in a way where we didn't hate the church. Yeah. And I think my parents, you got to like really guard what you say. It's like the church sometimes can become the enemy. Like she's the problem. She's not. Our fallen sin is in us and in people. So I just think we have to protect that. So I just think they brought me along. Yeah. I was exposed to it. I could see it. It made sense. They didn't hide me from it. there were components of it that were hard and that did shape some of my thinking about certain things, about polity in the church and other things like that. But like at the end of the day, yeah, and I also think Annie's dad, who's also a pastor,
Yeah, there you go.
was another component. A different family with a different vibe and different approach was also really helpful for me. And some things I can remember about that are just like conversations where it's like, hey, you know this is a marathon, right? Like you better guard your day off. You know, like don't like you need a Sabbath. And even sabbaticals and like contending for that. And there's some people that don't understand that, and they can think like, well, it must be nice to be a pastor. And I'm just kind of like, you know, one of the uniquenesses about being a pastor, I mentioned this in specifics, is it is the complicated overlap of a ton of areas of human life. So I live in a community that is my spiritual, emotional, relational, and financial. It's all overlapped. Everyone would like the lines to be really clear. And it's like the person that I have to fire has to also listen to me preach the next week. Do you have to do that?
Yeah.
You don't have to. If you fire someone, you don't have to see them again.
Yeah.
You see? Like that's different.
Yeah.
I'm not saying my job's harder. I'm just saying that's different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the challenge of pastoral ministry as a calling is you need to care for people, but then also confront people, tell them what they need to hear, take them where they need to go, even if they don't want to go. And you have to have enough courage and conviction to not kowtow to the fear of man, but you have to have enough sensitivity and compassion to not just bulldoze people.
Yeah.
And then you have to have enough emotional health, I think, and fortitude, where the inevitability of just people drama and challenge of life, you can't really just escape from it. It's stacked upon stacked.
Yeah.
It's your financial life, your relational life, your emotional life, your spiritual life are all coalescing in one sense. Why I think ministers, pastors need to focus on emotional health and spiritual integration. It's like maybe the most important feature is just being holistically integrated.
Yeah.
And that's why I think I mentioned like codependency needs driving you into ministry. And though it does drive a lot of people into ministry, well, they need me to help them. Do that for a while. If you don't get that fixed, you're going to just drive you into the ground.
Yeah. I offer this as an observation because I've been able to walk with you for some time now. We started with the example of your dad playing golf, and I think about how you are with your kids. And I think one of the attributes of why your dad probably gave you a warmth towards ministry is he was a guy who knew how to have fun. And you've told me this. He took you guys to Mariners games. He took you golfing. And I just say like, that's one of your strengths too. Is like, you know how to have fun. And it's like, we don't serve a God who's opposed to joy.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Yeah.
And so like, even if you're not a pastor and you're just working a normal job, like, are you living in a way that you're going to make your kid think that like work is absolutely horrible?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And I would say too, just like some other things I'll end with here, like transparency. So my daughter feels called to ministry. My son, oldest son, doesn't know. He feels, an interest in sports med and physical therapy. That's great. I've tried to walk a line, and I'm not sure I love how I've done it. I have some of my own critiques of my own process with my own kids. But I don't want them to feel like they have to be a pastor, and I don't want them to feel like they have to perform. I think we've done a decent job of shielding them from that. Where like they can just be a regular kid in the church. That pressure's not on them, and they don't have to hate the church. And I don't think, I know for a fact, none of my kids hate the church. Like they all serve in the church. They all love Jesus. They're all baptized. And I think Emma feels called to ministry, which is awesome. I want to help her pursue that. And it'll be unique for her being in a wheelchair and just her life, and continuing to pray for God's healing over her. And that'll be a fascinating story to let God write. And I'm here for it. I'm front row seat, baby, cheering her away, cheering her on. My other two sons are too young, right? Jack's 15, Liam's 11. Who knows? Will there be a pastor in my family? Maybe. But here's the thing, dude. I'm also detached from that. And one thing, here's how I would critique myself. I think I've been a little more detached from that than I think I wish I would want to be. Because I think out of fear I don't want them to feel forced. I also feel like sometimes I've under-initiated. and just kind of exposing them and like, just kind of like, isn't that awesome? And I've done a few things, you know, hey, would you be a worship pastor? Or, wouldn't that be cool? You know, I just want to be really careful with that because I don't want my kids at all to feel like any choice they make genuinely and humbly before God is they're worried about disappointing their dad. I'm their biggest cheerleader.
Yeah, that's good.
And the number one thing is that they love Jesus and they serve him with all their heart. And I'm going to cheer them on to whatever they want to do. But like, I guess it's just a question of like, it's that weird question with like kids, and you're starting this out, but it's like, as a parent, do you push your kid to the select premier sports? Do you push them there and like, or do they need a nudge, or do you like hands off? How hands off? How hands on do you get? And so in my situation, I think I'm more hands off because I don't want me pushing them to ministry to in any way spoil their soul towards Jesus. Mm-hmm. So if my kids, like Emma, she's expressed this. And so, I mean, she's like, Daddy, give me books. And so we're like talking about, okay, got it. You give me permission, I'm stepping in.
Right.
But I don't want any of my boys to think, if that's not the future God has for them, that what they choose to do is a disappointment to me or to their mom. It's not. Yeah. Their job is to say, God, what do you want me to do? And to do it with all of their heart. So.
Well, this is an expanded altar call right here. But yesterday we had 60 some people come up. I feel like it only does it justice if you've gotten all the way through a conversation like this and you're like, man, with all the challenges, with this cultural moment, everything, like I still feel the burn. Like I either want to vet out ministry. Yeah. I'm thinking about it. Maybe there's a call. Maybe it's just a next step, like leading a community group.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Like get into motion.
Yep.
But let's end with this. What's one practical next step as a pastor, church planner you would leave with those listening?
If you are what I would call stage one, curious, start doing ministry things right in front of you. So lead a group. Don't just go to a community group. Say, communicate to Pastor Bobby if you're part of this church and say, I want to lead one.
Yep.
On the ground training, right there. Get around other leaders. Say, I want to lead in men's ministry. I want to lead in women's ministry. I want to mentor someone in men's ministry, in women's ministry. I want to lead a community. You've got to get an environment where you're actually leading people. Reach out to Jesse. I want to lead students in student ministry.
Yeah, that's good.
I want to lead worship. And I want to lead children in kids. You need to get, it's there. There's a pipeline and get field practice.
Yeah.
And it will help confirm, okay? And it'll either fan the flame, you're like, no thanks, right? I also think pick the brain of people who are doing it. That's another way to do it. So that's okay. The other thing I would say is get really engaged on the fundamentals of just what it would mean to be a pastor. Like read your Bible, pray, seek God, set yourself apart, be comfortable with pursuing a higher standard of expectation for your life and be okay with it. Like start now.
There you go.
It's like, well, I kind of have a handful of like things in my life that are kind of like gray issues and I'm good with them. Start being not good with them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I just think you got to activate right then and there. Now that's for the person that's kind of like figuring out. The person that's like, I know, I've done that, I'm ready. Start formalizing your training and development process. What is it? What are you going to do? You're going to go to a university? Can you afford it? Because maybe you can't. Do you need a different, more curated plan? I think we could help you with that. That there's options you could take that are far less cheaper that can get you the education you need to get you started, but they aren't going to cost you 4 years at a $50,000 a year or $75,000 a year school. But that's the next step. And we're exploring some of those things that we could maybe do at True Up Church to help people more formally. If you're doing that, if you're like at Eastern, at Whitworth, at Northwest, at somewhere, you're somewhere, you're at Moody, you're doing it. And then I would say, okay, now you need specific mentorship relationship with someone who's doing what you want to do. You need to track someone down, kids pastor, worship pastor, teaching pastor, and you need to say, do you have space in your world I will buy you coffee, I will buy you lunch every month. I just want to get in your world.
Yeah.
That I think that's that next level. And then I think it's like at the church you're at, finding a way to go, how can I then make this an actual occupation? And that's where it's like building a resume, having to kind of like be, yes, Lord, I'll go where I can be used and see what God does.
There we go. Love it, man.
Yeah.
Well, hey, God delights in building this church, doesn't he?
He does.
All right, go in peace.